Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Hollander. I am the CEO and founder of ePratice Manager. Very happy to have you all here today for Tim Bowles' webinar on a very timely subject. I've known Tim for much of his 40-year career as a very successful litigator. Tim is an expert, and his firm deals with employment law and all of the issues therein. You know, this situation of COVID vaccinations in the workplace is something many of us have questions about. Tim is going to cover a great deal of this today. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And Tim, great to have you here. Going to turn it over to you.
Very good, Alan. Thanks so much. Welcome everyone, regardless of your time zone. It's 10 a.m. here in Pasadena, California. And welcome to my home office where I've been holed up for 10 months now, but who's counting? Nevertheless, we carry on, and I understand because we have many clients in the dental field, your challenges and this changing situation that seems to be a different playing field practically every week in the legal realm of compliance. So we're going to spend about 35 minutes now going over this playing field of vaccination. And of course, it's a brand new field, and we need to understand that it's constantly changing. So that'll be our first section, and we'll be gathering questions in the interim. I'll do my best to answer those within the time we have allotted to us. And also what you're going to be viewing today is a series of panels summarizing the situation in the federal agency area, in some of the states, and also in the practical sense of what we face. These panels can be available to you after the presentation. We'll get them to you in a PDF form. In addition to that, if you opt in, we can provide our weekly e-letter where we're sending out news on new developments all the time. And then most importantly, perhaps, we have a work in progress right now, my firm and I, in putting together template policies on vaccination in the workplace that will become available. And as soon as they do that, for any of you interested, will become to you again free of charge as part of attending today. So we move on. First of all, a few orientation points here. We know that state and federal regulation cranked up starting in March of last year, April, about 10 months ago. And it's important to understand the distinction between what the feds are doing and what your state and local governments are doing. The feds, and you'll see the pattern emerging here, are recommending policy. They're recommending action. The state and the local governments are dictating, they are requiring prevention measures. And that's where this sometimes disconnection comes in. Some folks think the federal government is dictating. No, they're recommending. And so this panel shows us that as of a month and a half ago, the CDC was continuing to recommend your masks, your social distancing, and brand new, because it had just come out, the vaccination. State and local governments are doing the requirements. And as it says here, there is no known state, local government that is exempting anyone who's vaccinated from the measures already in place, masks and social distancing. There's also no known jurisdiction that is requiring vaccination. So, and this is one of the key things we'll talk about today, is whether your policy should end up as a mandatory or a voluntary program for vaccination. We know that the states, again, are the ones that dictate, and in California here, and this is just now a few months old, we have new temporary standards, which include the prevention program, notification of exposure, the distancing, the face covering, and so forth. And new for us here in California, mandatory paid time off for COVID-related matters. That's actually not new, but it has new requirements. An obligation to give free testing, that is new. All right, so here come the vaccines over this past year, warp speed, the emergency use authorizations, and then of course from December, just a few months ago, the eligibility and distribution, which we've all read about and we have a great deal of interest in because the CDC has recommended initial supplies to be offered to healthcare workers, including all of your workforces. And at the same time, we have the states and locals developing distribution plans, and that's going to vary depending on what state you're in. But healthcare workers are still in the first tier in every state that I'm aware of, and that makes sense. So here's the CDC. This is their PR campaign, if you will, their promotional campaign to healthcare workers, indicating and promoting the full protection of not just your workforces, but of course the people that, their families and the people that you serve. And right at the bottom, encouraging vaccination. You'll notice that it doesn't say whether it should be encouraged as a mandatory or a voluntary. And this is, again, one of the major themes this morning. All right, so this is just 2 weeks ago now. Federal OSHA has guided, and I put that in, underline that, key measures for limiting the spread of COVID-19, brand new, and they're recommending workplace prevention that includes, as it says here, making a vaccine series available at no cost, providing the information and training, and having all those workers, very important, still having workers who have been vaccinated to continue the protective measures already in place, including face coverings and social distancing. Again, brand new recommendation. This map, and when you get the panel, you'll see this is the American Dental Association link, and this is not active on my screen, but it shows all 50 states, and when you do get the active link, you can go right to your state and you can see what the priority of allocations is for your particular jurisdiction. Again, healthcare workers, no surprise, are going to be right at the very top. Now, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about mandatory. And I got to say again, this is a work in progress. These ADA FAQs, frequently asked questions, have just come out in recent weeks. And you can see the link there if you want to go to the full list. We're going to be covering all of these subject matters, but going to more source materials than the ADA's summaries. But that first question is, can we require it, vaccination? And the answer is, it says and underlined, likely yes. So a little bit of caution there. And then beyond that, in that same answer, that the question raises a range of potential legal issues and some practical challenges. And let's get into that. What are these legal issues that you'll face if you are contemplating a mandatory vaccination policy for your workforce? Well, it starts with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. And they got into the act actually years before COVID with H1N1. And they dusted those regs off and clarified a few things, amplified a few things, and in March of this past year, issued their first set of guidances. And it says here, these are my words, the line between the employer need to know to protect health and worker privacy has moved significantly toward and in favor of employers needing to know. So again, our first shot out of the gun, and these still are in place, these guidances, that we can send symptomatic workers home, that we may require testing to enter the workplace rather, that we are permitted to take temperatures daily, and then that an overall screening plan should be developed. Now, think about that. That's a medical procedure, taking an employee temperature, seeking symptoms, this kind of thing, requiring testing. This all addresses the healthcare, the health condition of our workers, but the EOC has moved it further to our need to know than in normal times. That wouldn't be the case before COVID, of being allowed to take temperatures. And of course, this also applies to your patients coming in, and this is, I'm sure all you guys have these kinds of protocols in place. Now, the EOC has now expanded those guidelines just 2 months ago now. And there are, I think, 4, 5, 6 points. We're going to go and summarize all of them here at this point. So the first one is that employers may ask whether a worker has been vaccinated. Now, that again is a personal health choice, but we have the government, the federal government, recommending that it's okay to intrude privacy to that degree. And it gets technical here, but it says that a vaccination is not a technical medical examination, so you're not actually going into the existence of a health-related condition, and that's less private, obviously, than if you're asking whether the guy is ill. So we're free to ask if an employee has been inoculated. Now, here's where the line gets drawn, because the EEOC administers our Americans with Disabilities Act. The Disabilities Act protects the privacy and protects against discrimination for workers who have so-called disabilities. And the line that the EEOC has traditionally drawn is you can't ask a private question about a health condition, a physical condition, mental condition, unless it's standard, it's consistent with job-related and business necessity issues. So here, you can ask somebody if they've been vaccinated, but the EEOC is saying, be careful, because you want to warn the person not to give any medical information as part of the proof of, in order to avoid implicating the ADA. Now that's going to get us, that's going to come back here when we talk about the kinds of questions that you can ask and can't ask as we move on forward. All right, number 2 is that, this is again from the EEOC in December, that an employer who requires a vaccination must limit your screening questions. And it's related to what I just said before, is you got to be careful not to border into, well, we'll take an example. Why didn't you get vaccinated, or why haven't you been vaccinated? You don't want to ask that. You can see that might elicit health-related information. Now, similarly, if you're administering a vaccination program on site, the pre-vaccination screening questions cannot elicit whether or not the person might have a disability or a religious conviction that would prevent them from or make them concerned about getting a vaccination. You can only ask questions, as it says here, thanks to our bureaucracy, job-related and consistent with business necessity. Is it information that would pose a direct threat to health and safety of our workers? Now, what does that mean? All right, so an okay question is there any reason that would prevent you from receiving a vaccination? That didn't ask for a person's health condition. It didn't ask if they had a religious conviction that prevents it. So not okay questions that would elicit that kind of thing stands to reason. Do you have a physical condition, mental condition that would prevent you? Now you're asking for the potential of this person to disclose to you some preventative pregnancy, for example, that might be private to that person. Do you have any genetic characteristic that prevents you from receiving the vaccination? Again, something that's private to the individual, genetic propensity perhaps to certain kinds of hereditary illness. Do you have a religious belief? These are no questions. Now, there's an exception to that, and this is where if your program, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, is to have your workforce free to go out to get the vaccination in another location by a third party to whom we are not contracted. They can go to any pharmacy once it becomes widely available, any sports stadium, if you will. That third party can ask all kinds of screening questions that deal with medical, and it's not going to come back on us. So perhaps an argument to not have things in-house. Let the stadium or the local community vaccinators worry about that. So it comes back around. Now, this comes up all the time in my practice. You're being careful to not ask the wrong question so that you're not accused of being too intrusive. But if you said, is there any reason you cannot receive a vaccination? And they say, well, wait a minute, I have a physical problem and it may cause a problem. I have a religious conviction that may cause a problem. They said it, not us. The employer didn't say it. The employee offered the information. And what this panel tells us is that if we make it mandatory and a person then claims they can't receive the inoculations due to a disability or religious belief, then we have to have a conversation, what we call an interactive exchange, on how do we handle the problem? How do we handle this conflict between you're not being able to receive a vaccination and the fact that we are making it requirement. We don't have enough time to go. We could spend all morning on what that balance is, but accommodation would mean, are there ways that we can go around vaccinating you that would still protect and achieve the aims of maximum protection of our coworkers, of our patients? So we'll get to the end. I can offer you a punchline on that. So, and this is what we just covered. We must cover and explore possible reasonable accommodations. The process is vital. We are obligated to initiate and take the solution-oriented road on this accommodation issue. And then these points, which is first, we have to preserve the confidentiality of medical information. A vaccination is not a medical examination, but it is medical information. So who's vaccinated, who isn't, is private to the individuals, the workforce, and we need to keep that material confidential. And this is from the EOC, excluding an unvaccinated worker is the last resort. It says that if a person can't get vaccinated because of a disability, religious belief, it would then be lawful, if there's no other reasonable accommodation possible, for the employer to exclude that person, but not terminate them automatically. This is a case by case. This is where you call your legal counsel. And this also comes up when someone says, I have a moral obligation not to have it. I've studied, I've heard things about vaccination. I'm worried about it. It's not my disability. It's not my religious conviction. I just have a personal aversion to vaccination. That's perhaps the grayest area in all of this. And it comes down to a case by case. We're talking, of course, about a mandatory program, and we need to be prepared. We don't have to give reasonable accommodation to that, but is it a good idea practically? Probably, to explore that. Are they educated enough? Do they have all their doubts put aside? And it may well require communication. If it, when in doubt, communicate. That's the takeaway on that. Now, is it really practical to fire someone if they are refusing a mandatory vaccination when they have a ground and a right to be reasonably accommodated? The religion and the disability examples. And I'm asking the question here because we've all been in protocol for these many months already. We already have the masking, we already have the social distancing, we already have these cautions. You're taking temperatures on site, etc. My complaints with these existing protocols other than vaccination be reasonable accommodation. And I'll venture to say that that's probably the case. Voluntary vaccination. All right. Now, the one word we have from a federal government agency comes from the EEOC again with these expanded guidelines in December. And they comment that an employer offering a voluntary vaccination program must give the employee choice of answering pre-screening disability-related questions. So here, if it's a voluntary, of course, if the person wants the vaccination, then he may well raise, or if he doesn't want it, and he can decline it and not answer questions about pre-screening that might bring up disability, pregnancy, etc. Or he can go ahead and say he wants it. But in this case, we can ask disability-related questions because he's voluntarily participating in the program. The practical incentives here. We're talking about the incentives and the practical reasons, rather. Now, the incentives issue, and I know some of you asked these questions leading up to the session. The incentives issue, I don't have it right in front of me, but we Googled incentives, vaccination, workplace, and the number of articles on this is multiplying, by the day. And the issues that come down here and what you want to ask yourself if you want to give incentives, they're fine, but there's some things to remember. One is, what is going to actually result in maximum participation? A candy bar, no. Pay, yeah, probably. But how much pay? Because the second question, do the incentives signal that we consider vaccinations risky? If you're going to offer, I don't know, a week's pay for getting a vaccination, why? Are we talking about putting people in danger because vaccination can make you sicker than COVID itself? And the incentives signal program that's in fact not voluntary, giving people an offer they can't refuse. In other words, so generous that who would turn it down and not take the risk of whatever side effects the vaccination has. Now, beyond that, the EEOC, as I say here in the left corner, is this the left hand or the right hand? Because the EEOC also has, as many of you may know, a regulated wellness program set of standards. And in January, just 5 weeks ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago, they issued a proposed rule saying too high of an incentive to participate in any wellness program, or, whether it's, dietary, yoga, some exercise thing, and we're giving them an incentive to do that. It basically says that you can't make that reward or any penalty for avoiding the program so high that it becomes a coercion, if you will, of participation. And this fancy Latin term de minimis shows up here. So they describe in their regulations alone that the de minimis incentives are the okay ones, a bottle of water or a gift card of modest value. I don't know. When we come back to it, a movie ticket. This is, again, a gray area, but it's caused an uproar. Chambers of Commerce and many other business interests have written to the EEOC and said, no, wait a minute, we're in COVID. So you're telling us the only thing we can encourage people to go get a shot, if it's a voluntary program, is a bottle of water? Wake up. So it's a left hand or the right hand and a work in progress. So we will see, I'm sure, a lessening of this guidance. And again, this is guidance only. So again, practical issues for the actual incentives that we want to provide, paid time off for inoculation or post-inoculation. There are many large businesses in America offering these kinds of things. Cash bonuses, gift cards, and I say bottle of water. I think that that kind of de minimis incentive is not going to hold. We're trying to do the best we can as employers and as service to the public, healthcare providers, to maximize the protection to our workforce and our public. And I think we can confidently go forward, and we won't be questioned if we offer a reasonable amount of time off paid, if that's your preference to get inoculated, or for any sort of post-inoculation recovery period, if it comes up, if it's needed. Additional options and beyond just any kind of monetary or other valuable incentives would be promotion. And we saw that in that slide at the beginning, that the CDC is promoting and recommending vaccinations. So you can provide your workers with those CDC recommendations, factual information to assist them in their decision, FAQs, the pros and cons. This is all on the CDC websites. There are some risks to the vaccination. There are special considerations for pregnant women, et cetera. So an educational program, logistical information, where can you get your shots, make the vaccination available on site, no cost, and an overlap with what I just said in the prior panel, paid or unpaid time off from a regularly scheduled work for the vaccination. So, as I say here, a work in progress. What should a policy cover? And we are developing this now. We hope to have this template for both mandatory and voluntary available within a week or two. But this is a changing playing field, and you can see I have 10 considerations here that would go into a policy, and the purpose to promote it, mandatory or non-mandatory, whether it's going to be employer administered or outside vendor, vaccination exemptions, we talked about that, religion, disability, the risks, the availability of the vaccination, the incentives, paid or untimed paid off. GINA is the Genetic Protection Anti-Discrimination Law. The other policies remain in place, and no discrimination or retaliation for those that want to fall outside of our program. So, our takeaways. The current scene. The current scene is that the only thing constant is change. And you might have noticed as we went through those slides, the only government agencies that have weighed in on this so far are the CDC, which is understandable, and in terms of specific workplace policy and conduct protocols, one agency, the EEOC, is the only one to weigh in on this so far. We have the Department of Labor, we have the federal OSHA, and I understand there's going to be new standards there coming out on vaccination. And then, of course, most importantly, we have our state and local jurisdictions that are going to be issuing requirements. I would find it very difficult to imagine that COVID will become a requirement. COVID vaccination will become a requirement. And we can think of you in the healthcare field and the dentistry in particular. I'm sure there are, each state will vary, but you have required inoculations and immunities. But for example, the flu vaccines that come out every year are not required, they're voluntary. So this current scene is in change, but we're going to see the more and more clarifications come out, hopefully clarifications. We want to differentiate, as I said before, between the recommendations of the government and the requirements of the local, just state and local jurisdictions. And I believe that written policy is inevitable. Is it going to be mandatory, voluntary? That's going to be a choice that you'll be able to make, that you will need to make. What are your voluntary encouragements, including incentives? We've gone over that. And then what are your lines and procedures? Who's going to be the vaccination in charge, your czar of keeping track of all this, directing people, handling inquiries, handling protests, so forth. Your policy is going to need to cover these kinds of things as well. Now, there are some recommended follow-ups here that involve my law firm. And as I've mentioned before, you can opt in and follow up with us without charge. We have a e-letter that comes out on your screen every week, sometimes twice a week, often. And we'll have these template policies, a work in progress. You can also opt in for flat rate fees with us for our model policy manual forms and COVID supplement for 2021. The supplement will include, ultimately, you'll get it free of charge, but the supplement that we are providing our clients for flat rate fees is extensive on healthcare checklists, policies, and so forth that protect your workforce and your patient base. So those are things to let us know via ePractice Manager if you wish to participate in these things, and for further information and help. So we have this contact information.
Hi, Tim. Tim, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Oh, great. We just had a couple questions come in during your webinar, and I wanted to ask them now.
Okay.
The first question is, if an employee doesn't get vaccinated, are they still eligible to be paid for COVID pay if they miss work?
Yes, there's no deprivation of benefit under, for COVID absences. And we know that this is the Family's First Recovery, a COVID Recovery Act. There are two types, it's on our newsletter and our website, two types of Family First leave. And many of us experience that. There's a 10-day equivalent of 2 weeks of paid leave for 5 different reasons that are COVID related. Beyond that, there's unpaid leave, potentially paid and unpaid leave for those who have to be out for childcare beyond that. But no, a vaccination is not a prerequisite at this point, and I doubt it will ever be for getting paid leave that is COVID related.
Okay, great. And then the next question is, I have a doctor who is stating that he won't work with any employee or surgical assistant that is not vaccinated. That seems discriminatory to me. What's your opinion on that?
Well, that's where the management has to become part of the solution, and to communicate effectively enough with that doctor that management's not going to be put in that same position. We can't support that, particularly, first of all, because we have protocols in place that are preventative already. It'd be curious for me to hear this, call it an argument. I mean, it should be taken seriously, and we understand this is a sincere point being made by a doctor. But on the other side, we would assume that the clinic and the office has been operating in a safe manner for the past 8-10 months, and the protocols already put in place. So the vaccination is not a microcosm in that person's office. It's a nationwide and really a worldwide effort to achieve this overall herd immunity, if you will, so that the number of carriers of potential targets of this virus can be reduced, so it's no longer effective among us. So it requires communication, and part of that would be the knowledge that some can be legitimately exempted from vaccination for the disability and for the religious conviction. And so that's what I'd say. I mean, if the guy's going to refuse to work, after all of that's said, then what do I tell you? Call your lawyer. Call legal counsel, because you don't want it to end off. The thing you don't want to have end off is in in a termination of anybody. You want to try to resolve this if at all possible. Termination is the last resort.
Yeah, I guess he is, it looks like he's probably the doctor and owner of the practice. And I just got more information from the person who asked the question. And she's saying that the doctor is saying that it's to protect the patients and the other employees from COVID in the practice. Does that change anything you're saying, or do you have anything more to add to that?
The lead doctor, the owner of the practice, is saying everyone it's a mandatory program and someone's resisting that, or I'm not getting.
The doctor, it looks like the doctor's just saying he won't work with employees who are unvaccinated. And the reason is to protect the other employees.
I gotcha. Well, that's a mandatory program. This doctor is contemplating or implementing a mandatory program. And well, he's the owner. So there you have that other side of the coin. He's going to have to be aware of the available exemptions for that, and that gray area when an associate dentist or hygienist or what have you says it's enough for me to be able to comply with all the protocols already in place. So I would say that lead doctor ought to call his lawyer if he can't solve the problem from there.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that answers the question. And then I got one more in here. Can COVID leave be part of the required 6-day leave that this practice now offers, or is it in addition to? So for example, use sick leave or additional family COVID leave on top of the 6 days paid leave.
Well, if we're talking about either an internal policy that offers sick days annually, or here in California, we have a law which requires a statewide minimum sick leave for any reason for up to a minimum of 3 days per year. If I'm following the question correctly, the COVID leave is is separate from that based on the Family First Act, and in many cases the state and local law, which is imposing additional paid leave on top of whatever policy, in addition, or generic, shall we say, widespread sick leave statewide for any reason. So those are separate leave rights and benefits.
Okay, great. It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, so I am going to turn it back over to you here, Tim.
You're turning it back to me? Well, I guess she's turning it back to me. So, guys, the issue here is protection. It's common sense, and it's also recognition of this very unique situation that continues to change as we continue to learn more about the challenge in front of us, and to work out this balance between protecting our workforce, protecting our public, and the existing standards for privacy and the rights of workers to not be discriminated against and retaliated against. I think the biggest takeaway I have here is step back, and if you have folks that are resisting the idea of vaccination, understand fully what those concerns are, and address them in a highly professional manner. And I would hope that what we've seen here today would be some guidance on how to do that. So I thank you very much, and look forward to assisting all those that ask for our help. So thanks very much.
Great, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing that terrific material with all of us. Very, very helpful, and really appreciate your being here. So thanks so much. Want to thank everybody who attended as well. This is one of a series of webinars that we do on subjects that are timely and related to the management and overseeing of practices. You know, running a business is stressful, But for a dentist, it can be even more difficult and harder. We implement personnel and training systems that relieve the management burden and allow the doctor to focus on patient care. And that is what we do. So if you would like to talk to us about any areas that you feel may be getting in the way of having a smoother running or perhaps more productive practice, you can contact us at epracticemanager.com/consulting services. We'd be delighted to dive in there and at no charge, do an in-depth consultation with you and offer some real tools and experience that can help you. So go to that link, and love to speak with you in the future, and hope to see you again at another webinar. Thanks very much.